kill you all.
The story starts with Jimmy Cullen, known as the driver in the heist operation, walking about his cell and fixated on the group photo he had with his brother, Gary. The cops take him from his cell after completing his 10-year sentence in prison. Just before his release, the prison counselor advises Jimmy to put his cold prison life behind him and start afresh. But Jimmy is hell-bent on getting outside and fulfilling his bucket list. As soon as Jimmy exits the prison walls, he jogs for miles to a salvage yard and uncovers his classic 1970s Chevelle. He wears a leather jacket, retrieves a hidden revolver, and a list of names. Before igniting the engine, he hangs the group photo he had with Gary and zooms off into the town. On getting to Bakersfield, after a long drive, Jimmy crosses the road with one goal in mind: to find one of the targets on the hit list. So he barges into a telemarketing office and scans the area for a familiar face. As soon as he spots Prescott Ashton, he shoots him down execution style, scaring the ghosts out of everyone present. Meanwhile, Detective Humphreys, with the codename Cop, who struggles with heroin addiction, learns about Ashton's murder. So he goes to the scene and speaks to Cicero, another detective, telling her that Sergeant Mallory transferred him to assist her with her case. She finds it hard to believe, but he convinces her, and she reluctantly welcomes him on board.
Supervising sergeant tells me to jump, and I just go with the flow, baby.
Later that day, Jimmy confronts Roy, who supplied his car and weapon, and gives him money for his help so far. Jimmy then demands the names of other people he plans to take down, but Roy tells him it'll cost him a fortune. So Jimmy threatens him, but Roy calls his bodyguard Kenny to mess Jimmy up. The huge Samoan bodyguard starts waffling, but as soon as he sees Jimmy's tattoos, he signs out for the day, leaving Roy to come to terms with Jimmy's offer. During the same period, Cicero and Cop look into the CCTV footage, and Cicero notes that she has seen Jimmy before. After proper examination, she concludes that Ashton also recognized Jimmy before he got shot. Later that night, Jimmy looks through the list of his targets and singles out an old man, Kenneth Tyson, and drives to his address. In Cop's office, Cop calls his wife and promises to take their son to his baseball game the next day. But without giving him time to chat idly with her, she ends the call. The next day, somewhere far away, Killer, a man obsessed with perfection and looking for challenges, easily does the most difficult yoga positions. He then tells Lily, his girlfriend, about his achievements and thinks of the next obstacle to face. She gets worried for a bit, but Killer reassures her with a kiss that everything is fine. Suddenly, he receives a call from a client demanding his help in taking down Jimmy. The rich, egocentric hitman immediately leaves for his mission, but finds it hard to separate from Lily, so he changes his mind to spend some time with her before leaving. On his way, Killer speaks to his therapist about how hard it's been for him lately to carry out his duties. She then asks him what he does for a living, and he tells her that he's a surgeon who removes cancer. In response, the therapist relates to him based on how her clients in his field suffer from stress. Meanwhile, Mallory shows up at Cicero's office and apologizes to her for not informing her before sending Cop to work with her. As soon as Cop shows up, Mallory leaves the detectives to their jobs. Cicero then shows him her findings so far on Jimmy, informing Cop that Jimmy was an ex-convict who, in prison, was a force no one wanted to mess with. He was a getaway driver who aided in robbing a bank 10 years ago.
He got popped for a bank job 10 years ago, Bakersfield first,
and was very skilled with the wheels. Back then, Jimmy successfully got his crew out of a police chase, and things would have gone fine, but something happened. Meanwhile, Kenneth Tyson, an old bag of bones, lures a lady into his apartment by acting frail and having her help him with his load. He then offers her a glass of water, which he spiked to have her unable to move, and record obscene videos with her. Unknown to him, two vicious gunslingers hang around the neighborhood. One of them is tasked with protecting him and catching a hitman after him, and the other is tasked with the latter. While speaking to the therapist, Killer sees Jimmy going into Kenneth's building, so he follows suit. But before he ends the call with his therapist, he has a mini discussion with her about how Lily might be his kryptonite.
So are you going to ask her to marry you?
What I'll do? I'll pop the question.
Rather than agreeing with him, his therapist suggests that he marry Lily, and Killer agrees with her. Cicero, on the other hand, shows Cop a video of Jimmy and his crew being ambushed by another crew after the bank robbery. She concludes that someone set them up, and in the video, the men shot Jimmy's crew, demanded the money, and even killed Gary after Jimmy told them where it was. The downside of the clip was that only Jimmy and Gary's faces were seen, so it's hard for the cops to identify the other gang members. After Gary was killed, Kenneth, the videographer, told Jimmy to smile at the camera. Presently, he says the same thing to the college girl, but this time around, Jimmy barges into the geezer's room and puts a bullet in him, despite Kenneth's pleas. He leaves the room, but Killer spots him, and the two engage in a firefight in the hallway. In the end, Jimmy escapes. Back to Cicero, she explains to Cop that, although Jimmy got shot at the end and should have died, the bullet ricocheted around his skull
Bullet hit here, ricocheted around the outside of his skull, came out of his cheekbone. He's got a metal plate.
and came out of his cheek, so Jimmy has a metal plate holding his skull together. And based on Jimmy's declaration to kill all the gang members in the video, Cicero believes that he's currently hunting them down. After the meeting, Cop goes home, and his ex-wife Marina yells at him for being late to take Tommy to his baseball game. Cop being late has made her late for her rehab class, so she urges him to take Tommy, and he agrees. On the way to the game, Cicero informs Cop over the phone of another shooting, and tells him his attention is needed. After ending the call, Cop fakes a call with her, and cancels his schedule for the day to make Tommy happy. 2 hours later, Cop arrives at Kenneth's place, and learns that there was a shootout between two people in the hallway. When he prods further to know who, Cicero tells him that the other shooter was compared to a movie star. The one being spoken about updates Lily about his encounter with Jimmy, and after acknowledging Jimmy to be better than him,
The dude's completely arse, you know? I mean, there's like no sophistication to him whatsoever.
Lily assures him that he can take Jimmy down, so he proposes to her on the call. Later that night, Jimmy drives to his room at a motel and watches the news about the murder incidents he had committed. The next day, at the police headquarters, Cop hurts himself while getting coffee, and in the process, mistakenly reveals his tattoo to Cicero. When questioned about it, he tells her his backstory and how he married his CI, who was a crackhead. He accidentally exposes a part of his hidden self about being an addict, but quickly covers it up by lying that he stopped taking meth a couple of years ago. Meanwhile, Jimmy drives to Arvin to check on his ex-lover, whom he stopped speaking to years ago when he went to prison. Upon seeing her with children, he assumes the first child to be his, but she opens up to him that none of them are his kids, and the one he was supposed to have never came to light. Stricken with sadness, Jimmy storms out of her house.
You can't do this.
And she encourages him to kill all the people who wronged them. That very day, Killer gets married to Lily, and he suggests they start a family. She then asks him about his job, but he tells her he'll quit. As for Cop, he goes back to Marina, begging her to take him back, but after she refuses him, he starts grasping for straws, pleading for just a night. Marina takes the dope from him, and suggests they go to rehab together, but Cop tells her to wait until his retirement, which is due in 10 days. Later that night, as Jimmy drives to a strip club, where Nixon, the one who killed his brother, works, he hears an evangelist preaching about forgiveness on the radio, but Jimmy goes to the club either way without a weapon. Upon spotting Nixon entering the restroom, Jimmy grabs an ice pick and follows him in to fight.
All right, then.
Before the fight starts, Nixon sends an onlooker away and brings out a knife, but the knife isn't sharp enough to cut him any slack from the beatdown Jimmy gives him. After that, Jimmy stabs Nixon severely with the ice pick, and as Nixon bleeds out, he informs Jimmy that he has a son and begs him to apologize for him, handing Jimmy his phone. Minutes later, Jimmy leaves the club and calls Nixon's son to apologize on behalf of his father. Later that night, as Killer goes through the photos of his past achievements, a longing for victory creeps up on him, and he decides to take on Jimmy's case again. Lily sees him getting ready to leave and confronts him, but he promises to quit after fighting Jimmy. She gets emotional and cries, wondering what would happen, but he shuts her up.
What if he kills you?
Lily!
In Cop's residence, he chats with his son, but then heads to the bathroom and finds Marina nearly passed out after taking heroin. He asks her why she did it, and she starts mumbling about how humans make their own hell, each time they cause pain while they're alive. The next day, which is the 4th since Jimmy got released from prison, Cop informs Cicero about the crime at the club and suspects it was Jimmy, but she disagrees with him, pointing out that all of Jimmy's victims were shot. Still, Cop tells her he'll ask Nixon a few questions, but Cicero reminds him it's her case and wants him to go through the proper procedure. He hangs up on her and heads to the hospital. During that period, Jimmy hears on the news that Nixon survived the fatal wounds he inflicted, so he drives to the hospital to finish the job. Cop gets to the hospital before Jimmy and waits for Nixon to recover so he can question him. While reading a magazine on women's psychology, Jimmy casually walks into the hospital and heads to the ICU like he owns the place. He pulls out his Glock and shoots Nixon dead before fleeing the scene. The gunshots alert Cop, and he runs off looking for Jimmy. When he finds him, they engage in a gunfight, but Jimmy outsmarts Cop. He points a gun at Cop's head, but doesn't kill him, and instead drives away. While zooming off, Nixon's son calls Jimmy and vows to find him and kill him. To the boy's surprise, Jimmy encourages him and advises him to be sure of what he's getting himself into. Out of nowhere, Killer tails Jimmy with his supercar, and the getaway driver tries to use a truck to stop Killer, but it's to no avail. Jimmy shoots Killer's tire, and Killer shoots Jimmy in the neck, but he survives thanks to his metal plate. Jimmy immediately makes a run for it, and Killer loses sight of him. Shortly after, Killer receives a call from his client, telling him to back off, but he refuses and vows to complete his mission. After getting away, Jimmy drives to his mother's house and wakes her up by pointing a gun at her head. He asks her for his dad's location, but she tells him that his old man croaked years ago. Minutes later, his mom stitches his wound and learns that he came to kill his father, thinking he was the one who set them up, but she clears the air, telling Jimmy that his dad loved Gary too much to do such a thing. Unlike Jimmy, who isn't the old man's biological child, she apologizes to him for not being able to help when his father abused him, but he tells her that Gary was the only one who cared for him.
When his driver fell out, I volunteered.
Why?
He owed the wrong people a lot of money.
She finds it hard to understand, since Gary got him into the mess, but Jimmy explains that he willingly partook in that heist to help Gary clear the debt he was in. Jimmy then goes to check Gary's old photos and realizes that it was Marina, Cop's current wife, who was Gary's girlfriend at the time, and the one who gave up the group. The next day, Jimmy listens to the same evangelist on the radio and goes after him. Early that morning at work, the other officers praise Cop for his hunch and nearly taking Jimmy down. Cicero, on the other hand, scolds him not to hang up on her again. After running a background check on all of Jimmy's victims, Cicero tells Cop that the men were CIs who didn't spend long in jail, despite their serious offenses. She informs him that she's waiting on their informant logs, and he takes some of the files to help her with the case. Jimmy heads to Alexander Jared's church.
God down here to be saved!
One of the people on the hit list, and Killer goes after him. Cop also takes off with Jared's file and heads towards his church. Upon arrival, Jimmy stares at Jared dead in the eyes, and the evangelist pauses out of fear, but still carries on with his service. After service, the two of them talk alone, and after Jared's wife and son show up looking worried, Jared calms them down, and the grown-ups decide to take a walk. Outside, Jimmy asks Jared about his son, and the preacher tells him the boy is one of his many adopted kids. Jimmy notes that Jared has changed his life, but he tells him that it doesn't make up for the crimes he committed. He tells Jimmy that he doesn't know who set him up, and he was called to guard the door. Everything seemed fine to Jared back then, until they cut Gary's throat, which he didn't approve.
That boy they killed is my brother.
I can bring him back. In my heart, I'm sorry.
Jimmy then informs Jared that Gary was his brother, and Jared apologizes for what happened and tries to convince Jimmy that he can still change for the better. Adamant, Jimmy points a gun at him and vows to kill him, and Jared pleads for forgiveness. But upon seeing that Jimmy has made up his mind, Jared accepts his fate and tells Jimmy that he forgives him for what he's about to do. Jared gets on his knees and starts singing John the Revelator and prays for Jimmy. Frustrated, Jimmy shoots away and tells him to go back to his family. He then goes back to the church and stares at the cross while holding Gary's photo. Killer then creeps up on him and points a gun to his head, Meanwhile, Cop arrives at the church and receives a call from Cicero asking for his findings, which he reveals to her. After learning that he's without backup, she rushes to leave the office. But she finally receives the informant logs. Held at gunpoint, Jimmy tells Killer that he has nothing against him, but Killer gets offended since he's been trying to kill him for days. He tells Jimmy to acknowledge his skills, and Jimmy sees through Killer that he's a nut job. He calls out to him, and Killer seizes his gun. He then points the gun at Jimmy and declares himself the winner. But out of the corner of his eyes, he sees Jimmy's hit list, and being a genius, he scoffs at Jimmy for not realizing the obvious. Killer then informs him that there must be one more person for him to kill, and it should be the one who hired him. Cop, who has snuck his way into the room, points the gun at Killer and orders him to put the gun down. Angrily, the perfectionist yells at him that he doesn't work that way, and he finishes his job, but Cop threatens him, so Killer drops the gun. He then shoots Jimmy in the head, and Killer realizes that Cop was the one who hired him, so he asks him why and shows Cop the hit list to prove that Jimmy didn't know he was the one. Cop agrees with him because Jimmy didn't kill him at the hospital. Still, he needed to tie loose ends. Killer then storms out of the tent angrily.
Call it a hobby. You know what, keep it. I didn't earn it. Don't contact me again, I'm done.
And Cop calls him to offer him $1 for his job. He asks Killer why his payment is so low, and Killer calls it a hobby. He rejects the money, saying he didn't earn it, and tells Cop not to bother contacting him again. In the meantime, as Cicero drives to the church, she checks the informant log and sees that Cop was the informant all along. She then confirms from Sergeant Mallory that Cop begged for the case. Back at the church, Cop contacts Marina and tells her that he has closed the case. He tells her he'll be home in a couple of hours and promises they'll be fine due to reading up on women lately. Cop rejoices that he can finally catch a breather, but his expectation gets cut short, a bullet piercing his body from behind. Jimmy then walks up to him and shows Cop the flattened bullet he shot at his head earlier, informing the detective that he had a metal plate surgery. Cop struggles to catch his breath and says that he created his hell, but Jimmy calls himself the demon that crawled out of it. Then he shoots him dead before walking away. While driving back home, Killer calls Lily and tells her he's coming home. The police officers finally arrive at the church, and they see Cop's body. Instead of showing Mallory the informant log, Cicero keeps it to herself. Later that day, by the seashore, as Jimmy empties Gary's ashes into the sea and drives off into the sunset, Jared begins a sermon on forgiveness. The end. Thank you for sticking to the end of my video. Please do me the biggest favor by leaving a like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.